Hello, BNM official. I think your decision to increase the OPR is untimely. COVID cases are resurging, living costs are increasing, and uncertainties in global economy still linger. If you think about the economy as a car, typically monetary policy is used through increasing interest rates when you're trying to get the car to slow down. And so the economy is overheating, press the brakes, slow it down a little bit. If you look sort of globally, BNM is not the only institution that's doing this. I think like a huge number of central banks are increasing rates, right? Sort of in line with how inflationary pressures are going to go up. So I don't think BNM is sort of special in this way, but I do think that there's a debate to whether or not it was needed. This time is the eco cycle 12 years since 2008, 2009. It will be big market crash. Disagree with the general logic of this. There is this economic theory called real business cycles, which means that the economy goes up and it goes down, markets crash and then they get better. People who believe in this to an extreme tend to think that you can kind of predict when the waves are going to happen. Currently, I think a lot of our economic problems is not due to that at all. It's due to sort of things that nobody foresaw, which is the pandemic. And the war in Europe, which some people forget. Hi, my name is Melati Nungsari. I'm an assistant professor of economics at Asia School of Business, and I'm also a research affiliate at MIT Sloan School of Management in Boston. And this is my expert opinion. This is a very difficult time for a lot of people, and I think just as the whole pandemic has shown us, people from economically vulnerable groups will sort of face inflation and what's happening right now at sort of a disadvantage. And so what I think average Malaysians can do is actually prioritize in your consumption of goods things that make a difference. For example, if you have children at home, I really think it's very bad if people sort of cut out protein, for example, just because protein is increasing in price. And so if there's any way you can prioritize, the vulnerable people in your household and giving them what they need and maybe pulling back from some other expenses, I think that would be really useful. My second takeaway, and sort of one thing that people can potentially think about, is thinking about expanding your economic opportunities. We do have a pretty bad also underemployment issue in Malaysia, which means that people with high skills, people who went to university and got trained, are just not able to get jobs that are sort of at the same level of their qualification. I would say that these are very, very unnatural times, and if there are jobs out there that you think maybe not the best fit for you, but can pay you starting, next month, I would say that that would be something that you may want to take up. And if you have to, for example, do the gig economy jobs for a little bit, I would say this would be a time to do it and then see what happens in the future. If you are in the lucky subpopulation of society where you actually have savings and you sort of want to think about what to do next with it, pursuing maybe some options of investment may be good for you. So one thing that I think people are saying is that, purchasing sort of assets now while they're at a low price due to the market sort of, not doing so well would be a good deal. So some people have talked about maybe real estate. Some people have talked about, gold maybe being an option. But I did want to caution everyone to maybe stay away from assets that are quite uncertain and bubbly, like Bitcoin. So that I would say, unless you have tons of money to burn, I would not advise that as sort of a source of income or source of investment anyway. So as you know, Malaysia is not unusual in the increasing cost of living. This is sort of a global phenomenon that we've seen. And the reasons for this are a couple, right? So the first is sort of the rise in input and energy prices. We have the war between Ukraine and Russia that is sort of increasing fuel prices and gas prices worldwide. We have a supply of disruption of important things like wheat. China recently got out of a series of lockdowns on some of its main port cities, which also caused huge supply distractions, which also increases prices that are affecting what we Malaysians experience in our daily life. So I think that a lot of these issues are due to the pandemic. So if you think about disruptions at port cities, that's definitely because of the pandemic. If we think about China's zero COVID policy and how that affects the world, that's also due to the pandemic. But there also, I think, are some things that were not pandemic related, such as the war.
US and also in European countries, while in US, and the CPI has gone up to a 30 years high, about to 7 to 8%. I think this is one of the key reasons. That's why the market is worried so much, projecting that the American economy may facing a strong recession starting from the first or second quarter of the 2024. I think the picture for Malaysia is quite different, because I think during the last 2 quarters, the figures, economic performance, we can see that Malaysia now is on a very right track of the recovery back from the pandemic. And this is mainly driven by 2 reasons. One is a strong rebound of the private consumption, and another thing is the private investment. And overall, I think recently we have been seeing a great improvement in the labor market situation. That's why we can see the unemployment rate in Malaysia has come down very significantly. I think that's overall, which gives me a lot of confidence that I don't think recession is going to happen in Malaysia.
So there are a couple of things that you can kind of think about with policy responses. So I think one of the biggest things actually has been instituting a higher minimum wage. Typically, this will have sort of an effect where all other wages are supposed to increase and sort of adjust correspondingly, right? So that is something I think that is sort of a wage push, meaning the government is trying to make sure that wages at least can sort of increase in order to kind of fight or hedge against inflation. The second thing government has done, which is kind of backtracked a little bit on this, is sort of putting in price ceilings for things like eggs and chicken, stuff that are very staple in Malaysian kitchens. It's a bit sort of difficult for you to remove those kind of subsidies because everybody has to eat eggs. So that is something that I think they have done a little bit. I would like to see more of that. But the other thing I wanted to also mention is that gas prices. So we know that internationally gas prices have gone up, but in Malaysia, we really haven't felt that very much due to the gas subsidies. Now, there is a lot of debate about gas subsidies because people say gas subsidies encourage people to buy more cars, and then we have the worst congestion and there's no incentive to develop public transportation. And I agree actually with all of that, but I do also agree that people need to get places, right? And if there were no subsidies in place, people would suffer even more, given that we are a very car-centric community and we have to drive everywhere. So I think not removing the gas subsidies very much, or sort of letting them kind of stay during this period, I know is very costly for the government, but I think something that should have been done and should be continued to. I think what is most crucial is that people who need to and are having trouble buying things need to be subsidized in some way in order for them to actually afford it. Some people say that, the more cash you give out, the more reliant people become, stuff like that. I think we need to get away from sort of that mindset and thinking about, how do people survive after 2 horrible years of constant lockdowns, of constant infections. And so I would expect over time for a lot of these disruptions to sort of taper down a little bit. I think one thing that we have seen throughout the pandemic is that trust in political institutions is very important for governments and sort of people to work together towards a common goal. I think that Malaysia has sort of lost our plot a little bit with what our goal is and sort of what are we working towards. And so my hope for Malaysians is that perhaps once the general elections comes and we sort of settle down a little bit on what policy goals are, what are sort of societal goals, we can then sort of start working towards a goal, which I don't really feel we have right now. Typically, when you think about comparative countries, Malaysia is often lumped with Sri Lanka, actually, in terms of just thinking about development and stuff like that. So it's like Brazil, Mexico, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Indonesia. And so there are definitely similarities. I hope it doesn't happen to us, but I do feel like policymakers need to take into account inequality much more. The fact that some people can, go to London every 2 months and some people can't feed their kids or can't buy eggs. That is a real thing.